When a dominant chord resolves to a major or a minor chord, we call that a 5-to-1 chord progression, or in traditional harmony, that would be a perfect cadence. This chord progression can happen throughout a tune, but it almost always happens at the end of a tune because it creates a sense of finality. So what happens if a dominant chord resolves to another dominant chord? Well, then you wouldn't have the same sense of finality because the second chord is also leading towards a resolution. Now, if we continue the pattern and we also make the next chord dominant, well, now we're heading down a path that's going to take us through all 12 keys until we wind up back where we started. We call this playing through the cycle, as in a cycle of dominant chords. The dominant cycle shows up in a number of tunes, and I'm going to focus on 2 of them, but first I want to show you a few patterns that'll help you learn to play through the cycle. The arpeggio pattern you just heard me play goes from the root up to the flat 7 and then down to the 3rd. Going all the way back to this video, I pointed out that the 3rd of a 5 dominant chord is the leading tone of the 1 chord. So ending the pattern on the 3rd sets me up for the root that starts the pattern in the next key. Now I can make this even simpler by using triads, just playing 1-3-5-3 on each chord. Here's a variation on that 4-note pattern, playing 1-2-3-5 on each chord. These are very simple patterns, but they're building blocks for a lot of jazz vocabulary. Now I'm going to go back to the dominant 7 arpeggio, but instead of coming down the arpeggio, I'm going to come down the scale from the flat 7 to the root of the next chord. I've talked about the bebop scale in a few earlier episodes, and it's going to be very important when you're playing through a cycle of dominant chords. Here you see the G dominant bebop scale descending from each chord tone, which is a great way to practice your bop scales. Now here's the same scale, descending from the same 4 chord tones, but this time each one resolves to C. Here's the same pattern descending from the root, moving through the first few keys of the cycle. I'm going to go back to a 4-note pattern now, and this is one you'll hear a lot. It goes up from 3 to 5 to 1, then down to flat 7 and down to the third of the next chord, which starts the pattern. The movement from the flat 7 to the third is the other half of the tritone resolution that I talked about in this video. If I string these together, I run out of range pretty quick, and it's a big jump to continue the pattern down an octave, so I'm going to stop and start a couple of times. Now if I take that same pattern, but some of the time I go down to the root instead of up, then the whole thing lays much better on the horn. Finally, I'm going to incorporate an altered extension by arpeggiating from the third up to the flat 9 and then down the scale to the third of the next chord. As I talked about in this video, altered extensions increase the sense of resolution. If you were playing through a cycle of dominant chords, you'd typically start out on each chord with a non-altered sound, and then you'd move to altered as you get ready to transition to the next chord. By now, maybe you're thinking that I'm advocating patterns as a general approach to improvising. Now, I'm really not, and I haven't spent much time practicing patterns. But if you're faced with a situation where key centers are changing rapidly as they would be in a cycle of dominant chords, it helps to have some of this stuff under your fingers. In a real piece of music, you're not likely to encounter 12 dominant chords in a row, but you could encounter 3 or 4 of them in a row. And since dominant resolution occurs in most tunes, this is an efficient way to develop your 12-key fluency.